Right, so let's do Hitler's dictatorship first then. So, first date that I would memorise is that in January 1933, that is the date that Hitler becomes Chancellor. Chancellor being, right, like our version of the Prime Minister. It's a bit more complicated than that because there's obviously a president above him who's almost like a monarch figure, almost. Okay. So Hitler then faces several problems. So one of those problems is the president. He needs to keep President Hindenburg on his side, because if President Hindenburg turns against him, then he can get rid of Hitler. So he's got to always manage that. But his kind of biggest problems, first of all, are the Communist Party, trade unions who can cause strikes, and they're kind of a particular problem for Hitler. Other political parties. And then, of course, he's got problems within his own party, like we spoke about Ernst Röhm, didn't we? And his, in some ways, debauched behaviour. And also the fact that he's potentially angling to try and take control of the Nazi Party himself. Okay, so how is he going to deal with these problems is basically what we're talking about here. Well, the first important event comes, is it 27th of February, I think it is? I'll double check that in a minute. 1933, and that is the Reichstag fire. Now, without TMI, it is up for debate whether that was actually orchestrated, created by the Nazi Party. There are lots of historians and lots of sources which seem to suggest that that was the case. Whether they did or didn't, the Nazis used that to get rid of the Communist Party, because a communist called van der Lubbe is found on site with matches, and he's a known member. He's Dutch, but he's a known member of the Communist Party, and he admits to it. Right. So Hitler uses this, or the Nazis use this, to eliminate the communists. How? Well, Hitler basically manages to persuade Hindenburg that the communists are a threat to the entire country and therefore must be banned. Several communist leaders are rounded up. Some of them disappear, assumed killed, or are sent to concentration camps as well. And the communists are effectively no longer a threat. They're banned. Crucially, what Hitler also manages to convince Hindenburg to do after the Reichstag fire in 1933 is give him emergency powers to pass any laws that he wants. And he uses those emergency powers combined with like the muscle of the SA, the brown shirts, to get a law passed in March 1933 called the Enabling Act. And I always like to remember this as the Enabling Act enables Hitler to pass laws whatever he wants, or to pass whatever laws he wants. Enables Hitler, or the Chancellor, whoever that is, it just happens to be Hitler, right, to pass any laws. So those temporary laws that he's been given by Hindenburg as a result of the Reichstag fire have now effectively become permanent. It's permanent for a period, I think, of 4 years initially, and then there'll be a re-vote on it. It is actually voted on every time. The Nazis do stick to that, but you can imagine they're kind of controlling and making people vote for it, right? And that is actually kind of what happens here as well. I mentioned before briefly that he's able to pass the Enabling Act as a result of the emergency powers he's got, and also because of the muscle of the SA. The SA are Röhm's men, right? The Nazis kind of henchmen, I suppose, and they are used to block certain people entering the Reichstag, the German parliament. They're not allowed in on the day of the vote for the Enabling Act, so they aren't able, people who are against the Nazi Party aren't able to vote against it. Okay, right, so that's the Enabling Act. What then kind of happens in between the Enabling Act in 1933, and the next sort of swathe of events which come in 1934 is the Nazis are kind of going through this sort of glacial, I'm probably going to spell this wrong and pronounce it wrong, but this sort of glacial tongue process. So what does that involve? Well, it's brainwashing, right? So this is when the Nazis are starting to change the school curriculum. This is when the book burnings are happening. The Hitler Youth is sort of in its infancy, it's beginning. Beginning to, exactly. Yeah, beginning to. And so it's all part of this, well, we're either, for those of you who, his other issue, right, is he's got to convince the German people that Hitler and the Nazis are right for them. Lots of people voted for the Nazis in the 1932 election, but not everybody. So Hitler needs to convince those people, and one of the ways that they start to do that initially is through like brainwashing, glacial tongue. Oh, we're one strong nation. We're here for you. Look at all this terrible, debauched stuff that was happening under the Weimar Republic in the Roaring '20s. Berlin was this cesspool of iniquity. We need to like fix it and sort things out. And we're your guys, basically, to do that. So, kind of as part of that, I guess, clear out of debauched behaviour and return to traditional values, well, actually, that involves Ernst Röhm, doesn't it? Because Ernst Röhm is a known homosexual, which, if you're a member of the Nazi Party, is obviously not ideal in relation to their policies. So Ernst Röhm comes to be targeted. He's also an issue, right, because people like Joseph Goebbels, Heinrich Himmler, all these leaders who are becoming more and more powerful in the Nazi Party, they don't like Ernst Röhm. And Hitler gives him special treatment. Röhm calls him Du, which basically means mate, because they've been friends for a long time, right? And Goebbels, Himmler, Heydrich, they don't like him, so they want to get rid of him. So in 1934, in late June and early July, we see the Night of Long Knives. Which is a purge, isn't it, on the SA and Ernst Röhm specifically is killed along with hundreds, actually, I think it's several hundred, 400-ish, other SA leaders and countless kind of SA men, etc. And the SA is basically eradicated. The SS is given more powers. Of course, that's led by Himmler. And that's going to be important later on with how like Hitler establishes control over Germany. And that leads to two main things. First of all, the Oath of Allegiance. From the army. Days in 1934, also early July, I think, or is it August? It's August, because what actually comes first, and I should have written in there, is the death of President Hindenburg. And that happens in August 1934. After that date, Hitler becomes the Führer, because that's a position of his own making, right? It means leader. Well, two things happen. Hindenburg dies and Hitler decides there will not be another president. He gets the army to swear an oath of allegiance to him and the Nazi Party, but specifically to Hitler. And he uses that to push through a public vote on Hitler becoming the Chancellor and the President in this new role, the Führer, and actually the German public vote overwhelmingly in favour of Hitler becoming the Führer. So he does it legally, he doesn't just sort of force it through. The people vote for him. Okay, so Hitler equals the Führer, the leader. All right? Okay. we will get through as much of this as we can, but I'm a bit conscious of time, so yeah, we'll get through as much as we can. Oh, I should have said, by the way, the Enabling Act also enables Hitler to get rid of all other political parties. He bans all other political parties after that. So that's another one of his problems, right? And he also uses it to ban trade unions as well, so those people who can call strikes, and they actually caused lots of problems for the Weimar Republic before. Well, he's going to get rid of them too. Okay? All right. So that's how he becomes dictator, but there's still like opposition to the Nazis, right? He still needs to convince lots of German people that the Nazis are right for Germany and right for them. So the next unit, the question we asked was, why was it so hard to oppose the Nazis? Or I guess we might say, well, how are the Nazis gaining control, right? And in basic terms, one way that they're doing it is through terror. And so this is things like the SS and the SD, or concentration camps. And you might say it's like a terror machine, and lots of that is kind of perpetrated, like delivered by organisations like the SS, the SD, and the Gestapo. And of course, where are people being sent? Well, they're being sent to concentration camps. And in these early days, part of the terror that they're creating is kind of this smoke and mirrors, hidden, secretive kind of world. The rumour that there's a Gestapo agent on every corner. In reality, there wasn't. But those Gestapo agents, the few that there are, they're creating that myth, and they're pushing that myth on people. And what the effect that has is that ordinary people start to snitch on their mates, right? They start to say, oh, Julie down the road, I've seen her talking to a Jewish person. She must be, she must be in favour of the Jews. My local Gestapo officer, my block leader, you should go and talk to her and tell her off. And then they end up getting whisked away to these concentration camps that people also don't know anything about. People start disappearing. They don't really know where they're going. They don't know what the concentration camps are like. All that they know are the people who come back are, starved, emaciated, half worked to death. Clearly, these concentration camps are not a nice place, and there's some terrible things going on. Okay, so this kind of terror that's created is all designed to oppress people, squash people down. Like how we saw with the Normans, right, oppressing the Saxons. It's the same sorts of things in different ways. So that's sort of one side of what they're doing. Then there's, mixed up in this kind of world of terror, there's also what the police and judges are doing, right? Well, firstly, the Gestapo effectively are the police, and as the Gestapo are led by the SD, and then the chain of commands leads up to the SS. A reminder that the SS, is led by Heinrich Himmler. The SD, who lead the concentration camps, and the Gestapo is led by Reinhard Heydrich, and the SS is led by the SD. Okay, so that's sort of the chain of command. So the police is basically under the control of all of that system now as well. And then also the Nazis take over the control of the judges and the court system, the trial system. So the judges have to swear an oath to Hitler. The sentences that they're also giving out after the Nazis come into control are much more severe. So the number of death sentences given during the Nazi regime rises dramatically. There were 3 death sentences given in 1933. By 1943, 10 years into the Nazis' reign, there were 46 death sentences given in 1943. So a huge increase. And there were, I'll say that again. The number of crimes that are punishable by death rises, and by 1943, 40,000 people are being sent to their deaths. Okay, so it's a really huge increase. All right, so they're taking control of all sorts of things. The other side of how the Nazis are gaining control is propaganda. Obviously, this is led by the Nazis' Ministry for Propaganda. And the head of that is Joseph Goebbels, this really sinister figure that we've spoken about. You might remember us looking at that photograph that captures the moment that Joseph Goebbels is told the man taking the photograph is Jewish, and he looks really sinister, I think. A strange character. But he was a master of propaganda, right? And the Nazis are really good at giving simple messages in dramatic ways and repeating them over and over. They actually learn a lot from the communists in Russia. They use bold colours like red on purpose. They use really bold typefaces, like if you think like Arial on Word, right? Really thick, bold typefaces that grab your attention. Or they use old typefaces like medieval German typefaces to look traditional, right? So they're trying to kind of grab people's attention in ways that it means something to them. And we see that obviously in posters, but also the Nazis' propaganda regime is really sophisticated because they're not just using posters, they're also using film. And when I say film, we're talking about like news film, but also movies. And I suppose the example that we've looked at here, I suppose it kind of goes into a news film and a movie sort of thing, really, is The Triumph of the Will. But you also might remember we watched footage from an actual movie that the Nazis made, like a drama movie called The Eternal Jew, which was hugely controversial. Okay, so they're using films, they're using radio. You might remember that the Nazis produce really cheap radios so everybody can afford to have one in their house. Through the KDF, the Strength Through Joy movement, they create like a voucher system where you can buy vouchers so you can get a radio or a wireless, as it would have been called there. And all of Hitler's speeches are played out on the radio, so are Goebbels' speeches and Himmler's speeches, right? They're ramming it down people's throats. We see this in newspapers. So the Nazis take control of all newspapers in Germany, really, all official ones anyway. And the editors of the newspapers got daily bulletins. Directly from Joseph Goebbels, can't spell, bulletins. They got daily bulletins directly from Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Propaganda, telling them what they could and couldn't write that day. So they're controlling everything. And then, of course, the last one, there are lots, but the last big one that we've spoken about is rallies, and the typical example of this being the Nuremberg rally, which is, of course, going full circle. What features in Lena Riefenstahl's, definitely saying that wrong, film The Triumph of the Will. Okay. The first one is in 1935, I think. No, 1934 is the first one. That was meant 1934, right, 1935. Okay? All right. Have I missed anything out? No. Oh, I suppose the other kind of big propaganda thing we've spoken about is also the Berlin Olympics, which was a great way for Hitler to kind of show off, basically. And that's in 1936. Okay? All right. So that is how Hitler gained control.